Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. I've set out to uncover amazing and insightful stories by interviewing people from all different backgrounds and perspectives. But unlike other interview shows, only this show aims to also teach you what it means to listen more than you speak so that you can become a more thoughtful and informed person in your everyday life. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell and that listening to someone speak their truth and their experience is one of the most human things that we can do. And more than ever, there is a general lack of willingness to go deep to understand why people think, act, and believe like they do, especially when there are differences of opinions. My goal is to counter this by asking my guests questions and getting out of their way. By seeding the narrative and simply asking the next question, I hope the stories that deserve to be told come to life so that we all might better empathize with the people, the human beings around us. And speaking of differences of opinions, there's something going on in the United States this week. I can't think of what it is. Oh yeah, only probably the most divisive election ever, where the differences of opinions are just so escalated in everything that we see. They may not be as different as we see on social media and in the media itself, but they're there. And this is going to be just an interesting, if nothing else, next, 2-3 weeks, 2-3 months, who knows what the future has in store for us. And even by the time this episode drops, things may change. But this week, I welcome onto the show Harri Hursti. Now, Harri is a hacker and a researcher, but he's a hacker for good. He is working to find and fix vulnerabilities and openings within our election systems and our election processes and our election technologies to make sure that our elections are as safe from interference and fraud as possible. And you'll hear in this episode, Harri's a busy guy, right? Harri is all over the place right now. As I recorded this, I caught him on his lunch break in Atlanta trying to fix some of the voter waiting issues that they were having there in Atlanta. And it's just, I wanted to ask him, what is this election like? What are the things that we need to be paying attention to? What's the outcome of this going to look like in the days after November 3rd? I think that's a question on all of our minds. And I ask him point blank, is there any reason to believe that this election will be fraudulent or illegitimate? So listen to the end for that. Also, listen to the end. I'm going to give you my takeaways in the end. It's a new thing that I'm going to start doing. I'm going to give you my takeaways on the interview. And if you have your own, feel free to email them to me, michael@thefollowupquestion.com. And I'd love to get in a conversation with you as a listener of this show. So here we go. Let's get into it. Here is my very quick and short and to the point interview with Harri Hursti. Yeah, let's start there. Like, how busy is the time for you these days in the final days of the election?
So every single year the election is different, and this year there is a unusual amount of issues in Atlanta, and that's why I have been basically in Atlanta for 2.5 months for the primaries, and there has been a various of special elections. So spending time here. And Atlanta and Georgia is in an unusual situation because a year ago, judge made a very good order. Federal judge ordered all the unauditable system which was used here to be scrapped and replaced. Unfortunately, the state decided that instead of going the simplest system, which would have been also the safest, hand-marked paper ballots, they decided to implement the most complex system probably in the U.S. and most expensive system and try to roll it out in a presidential election year. So there have been a constant string of issues here. Mainly the issues are causing long lines and annoyance in that way to the voters. But people are very patient here and standing in line 5 to 8 hours. People are standing in line 5 to 8 hours just to get to vote. So I don't think it's acceptable, but people are really wanting to vote, which is good.
Yeah, you've been through so many different elections and been involved in so many different ways. How do you judge the turnout that you're seeing so far?
So I have seen a high turnout in a local elections. This is really unusual because it is obviously a major election. At the same time, I would like to point out that in Europe and in the international press, it's very often a notation that Americans have a low turnout and Americans are not interested to vote and have that negative connotation. While the reality here is that people are trying to vote, they just don't necessarily be able to. In June, a special election, which was on Tuesday, as always. Number of polling locations where I went, the polls hours after the polls were supposed to be open, they still haven't been able to open the polls. And if you are in a schedule, you are planning to vote on a lunch break, or if you are planning to vote before you go to work or after work before you get your kids out of school, all of a sudden having 4-hour line is unacceptable. And again, in the news, we see long lines. And that's, of course, visibly saying this is bad. But especially now in the early voting, my hotel is across the street from one of the polling locations. So I have been going there almost daily to see how things are progressing. A number of days I clocked, you cannot wait in that polling location inside, and it's 3 walls are glass. So from 270 degrees, you can just outside watch what is going on inside. So a number of times I was observing that almost 20 minutes, 17, 18 minutes time from when you get in before you even get to start to vote. That's how long it took to check you're in. Wow. So again, I was observing 1 hour when they got 7 new voters in a whole hour. So 30 people line is not impressive in a picture, but if the line is not moving, it can be a very long line.
Yeah, absolutely. What is the biggest threat or issue that in the final days of an election like this, what are the biggest threats or issues that you and your team have seen or dealt with?
So the story right now is the voter check-in. Once all the other problems are no problems are acceptable problems. But if you look at the grand picture right now, the real big issue is voter check-in, and there has been a number of different explanations, and there have been a number of times when it has been claimed that the problem has been solved. Again, I just came from Ponce de Leon Library location, long line outside, and really the line was moving very slowly, and check-in was again the bottleneck. Half of the ballot marking devices were unattended. There was no voter because they just simply cannot get people in to vote. So even when the state has number of times made a claim that the problem has been solved, it's not solved. The lines are still long, and the problem really is the check-in process part. Then when the actual election day happens, the process on election day is going to be different. One part of this process used today is not going to be anymore there. Hopefully that helps the lines, but we'll see. So in here, in Atlanta, that's the story. Of course, in the other news, it has been widely publicized that one of the counties north of Atlanta, called Hall County, has a ransomware, which is preventing them to do a signature checks. Since a lot of these systems are usually used by more than one county, there's no clarity right now. Is the ransomware only isolated to one county, or is that a one county which is telling what's going on, and the problem is actually more widespread? Nobody knows. But what I'm trying to say convey and communicate is there's not a single problem. There's a lot of problems there. Some problems are bigger. Some problems might be local, but the end result is a long lines in many places.
Harri, what about election interference? Are you seeing instances of that, and are they domestic or foreign threats that if you are seeing them, that you're witnessing?
Now, if you talk election interference as a social media and in influence operations, if you may, yes, that is very visible. There are a completely new kinds of information campaigns, which, best of my knowledge, either were so small that, or not reported that in 2016 I didn't hear more than like one isolated or two isolated instances. And what I'm talking is influence operations, which are targeting the relatives of U.S. citizens living abroad. And so there's now a misinformation and information operations which are not targeting people living in the U.S. for various reasons. Yet the target is U.S. elections in the influence operations. So I think that's a new thing. And if you logically think if that is where you are going, that means that all the other activities up too, because that is not a wide market for anyone to attack.
Is election interference, has it always been as prevalent as it's being portrayed right now? Or is this simply a means that we have so much information coming at us?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things. So influence operations in elections have been going on, widely documented since the Second World War. This happened in paper pamphlets in the 50s and 60s with a pirate radio stations in the 60s, 70s, early 80s. All of this has been going on, but those have been a blanket cast operations. You cannot target if you park your pirate radio station in international waters outside of the nation's borders. It's then anyone who tunes into the channel. What social media is really changing is both it allows the misinformation to be targeted, but there's the other thing, which is just what the social media is. Social media is an advertising platform, and that means that the operators of the platform want to keep you spending as much time as possible on their platform. We as humans, we like when things are agreeing with us, and very few people have a critical thinking and are happy when things are not agreeing, when they're disagreeing with you. So for this reason, social media operators' algorithms are sending you messages which are agreeing with you, and it's creating these information bubbles which are amplifying themselves. Of course, what this creates is the illusion people around me are agreeing, which also creates a lower barrier to retweet and repost everything you have seen. So it actually gives like free boost to all information once you create this kind of bubble. And the key part here is that when we already know from the congressional hearings of 2016 and everything what I've presented, the messages which are used for political influence, especially if you look at Cambridge Analytica messages, you don't actually by first glance understand this is a political message. Mm-hmm. It's not clear from the first glance that this is targeting to discredit one candidate or boost another candidate, because the message itself is hidden to another themes. And we also always in social media, because we are a confirmation bias animals, we intellectually we know that when you go to Facebook or when you go to Twitter, you don't see the same messages than your friends. We intellectually know that that's not true, but emotionally, we think that we all see the same messages. And that fallacy, that our monkey brain not being fine-tuned to this, is part of the reason what creates why the information operations in social media are so powerful and so contagious. And the key here is the contagious. And I think one thing what we have greatly missed is that when the propaganda and misinformation operations were done with a more traditional means, we were teaching our youngs in the school and older in different wings to exercise a source critic. Ask yourself a question: is this credible source? Is this message authentic? When social media happened, we lost that. And we really don't have a program today to train people to have a human firewall, to have a critical thinking. And when we see a message which we like, the question, even when I like this message, is it true?
Yeah, and I just have a couple more questions because I know you're busy and have to get out of here. But that I did want to ask that, like, what can we as everyday Americans do? You just mentioned asking the question, even if we like what we see, is it true? Are there other recommendations that you can provide us in these final days of the election?
I think the number one is ask yourself, is it true? And especially before you have asked that question, resist the temptation to share it. But I think the most important is to know what we can reasonably expect for the election day. First of all, every state has different laws, and there are states and counties where the law allows opening of the absentee ballots and opening the mail-in ballots only election day. So there can be millions of letters which cannot be opened until election day. If you look how jurisdictions work, it means that small jurisdictions which are quite often in a rural area, those are the ones which can report early and they can report very quickly the results. While cities and large counties, those will be coming in late, and especially if it's in an area where they cannot even start to process the mail-in votes, that can be easily 3-4 days before they can produce a comprehensive result. So one thing is to expect a long delay before the results are wide enough that you can call the election. The second thing is, again, since different size of counties tend to have different demographics, cities are by large different than rural area in their demographics and political demographics. So that means also that the results will, during the count process progressing, the results will live in a way we haven't seen before. And the why we haven't seen it before is because of the long delays. In the primary, there was a number of cities, including in New York, there were a wild swings, all of a sudden double-digit swing in the middle of the counting, which was raised a lot of eyebrows. So, well, how is possible that there's this double-digit swing, in a day 2 or day 3 of the counting? Well, interestingly enough, when the analysis was made, that 15% swing, in a sense, has always been there. It is just when the results came so quickly, so many different results came at the same time, that they're canceling as effect, the statistical multiplexing, getting so many different things at the same time, just even it out. You didn't see that swing, but the swing was there. It just was between the commercial break, or during the commercial break, it was already evens out. Now when we are expecting, instead of hours, days, a lot of things which we didn't see, but were always there, become visible. And since people haven't seen those before, I'm absolutely certain bad actors with the influence operations will be pointing to these things and calling them anomalies and claiming that the smoking gun for a fraud or whatnot. It's not. It's just the way that more things have become visible than ever before.
With the Supreme Court's decision to not allow voters in Wisconsin to have their ballots counted if they've been postmarked by Election Day but received after Election Day, is that ultimately the right thing or a good thing in your opinion?
Absentee balloting and mail-in voting has been around in the United States for 150 years. It has been used in Vietnam War, Korea War, World War II, World War I, and Civil War. There is a special class of voters called Uokava voters, uniform and overseas voter, and then they have a special law called Uokava Voters Act. There have been never a requirement that your ballot has to be arriving on the election day. And basically, if you are saying that all voters, their ballots have to be in by election day, you're, for example, saying, oh, we don't, overseas military, active duty military, well, sorry, you cannot, your vote doesn't count. I don't know if Wisconsin has an exempt saying, oh, by the way, if you are overseas military voters, then your ballot can arrive late. If that is the case, now you are in the situation where all voters are not treated equally. All Americans should be treated equally. So I think the idea of making a new interpretations is a problematic, and you know, especially in the question of questions being raised how U.S. Postal Service, through both pandemic and the delays in that and other ways, might be causing delays in delivery of ballots. I think that's a controversial decision right now. I cannot get back to my state to vote this year, and it took me a long time to get my absentee ballot. And you know, I hope my ballot counts when I'm mailing it back. I'm mailing it back week ahead of time, but you know, I wasn't expecting it took that long to get the ballot here.
Sure. Get that.
I literally received my ballot on Friday.
Wow. Yeah, get it in as soon as you can, right, for everyone. Hey, Harri, last question for you, and I'll let you go. Is there any reason to believe that the results of this election will be illegitimate in any way?
So my answer to that is that we are more likely to have a false claims that something was wrong than anything else. And unfortunately, our system is not very well suited to prove that nothing happened and defend itself against false claims. And because of mail-in balloting, which is a paper ballot, we are actually in a much better shape than in the previous elections, because now there's more votes are cast in the permanent media, which means that you can audit it, you can figure out if there's a question of the results, are those results correct? You can always revisit the ballots and count them. And also, a lot of the voters don't know that most of the United States mail-in ballots and absentee ballots, they offer a tracking system like here in Georgia. You can actually track your mail-in ballot has it arrived. So I think we are in a good shape, and you know, it's not perfect, and it has to improve. But under the circumstances, we are in a better shape than 2016.
That's wonderful to hear, Harri, and thank you for all the work that you do. I'll let you get to lunch, sir, but thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate your insight on what is going to be a crazy next week for us, right?
It's going to be a wild ride.
Thank you so much, sir. Take care.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
no matter what you read, no matter what you hear, no matter what you see in the coming days and weeks, ask yourself, is it true? That was the most powerful point of everything Harri said. Whatever you see, ask yourself, is it true? Take the time, understand, is this credible? And understand that things like big swings of ballots, so big double percentage point swings of ballots, and one candidate may be leading by double percentage points and then have a wild swing the other way. That's not necessarily a sign of fraud. That is just us getting more of an insight and a window into the election process because of the time that we're in and because of what's at stake. So again, ask yourself, is it credible? Is it true? And your confirmation bias and the way that it is preyed upon by social media algorithms, by showing you what you want to see rather than what we as educated and informed voters should see, which is all sides of an issue. I don't say both sides because there are never just two sides to an issue. Educate yourself, seek out differing opinions, and goodness, ask yourself, is it true? And be patient. This is going to take a long time. Just like waiting in the lines, as you heard Harri talk about with his issues in Atlanta, be patient. Don't rush to judgment. Don't think that this is going to be a quick process. Be patient and let's get through this, guys, okay? Thank you so much to Harri for his time and insight on the show today. Please do me and Harri a huge favor and share this episode with someone you know who might also find value in listening to today's conversation. I want to give you a heads up. There's also a transcript of this conversation on my website, thefollowupquestion.com. Because of the background noise and because Harri obviously has an accent, I wanted to provide a transcript just so you could follow along there if you found some parts of it a little bit hard to hear. But share this episode with your network and help spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions and asking that question, is it true? And if you have it in your heart, please leave a rating and review of this show, wherever you might be listening. And don't forget, subscribe to the show. That helps. All right. Goodness, buckle up. Get ready for the next week, the next month. It's going to be a wild one, but I'll catch you next week on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question. And until then, keep asking questions.